Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. So today's going to be an update video for the Ranvoo AICE Lite Plus. As previously mentioned, I was going to actually test this out, real world usage, and come back to you with some feedback in terms of what it's like and give you my impressions with a proper review once I've had it for a little while. So the unit itself is advertised as a portable air conditioner. So it sort of gives you a little bubble, little ecosystem of your own, and you can set the temperature and things like that. And it works for both cooling and heating. Now the heating element of this, obviously right now, this time of the year for us in the UK isn't really relevant. I have tested it and it does seem to work, and I tested it indoors just for a little while to see how it works. And one of the things that I want to just correct from my original video was, so when you're using the cooling system, it works by cooling down these sort of induction plates, and then it blows air through various fins both at the top as well as on the bottom, pointing towards your neck. Now I had assumed that for the heating side of things it would do a similar thing, but it actually doesn't. So for the heating, it only uses the sort of induction plates. It doesn't use the fans. The fans, basically you can turn them on manually in the app, but all it does is blows cool air. Not cold, but just sort of ambient room temperature kind of air around. So the heating side of things is just via the actual contact with the skin. In terms of does it work? So yeah, heating works perfectly fine. Even on 40, which I think was like the lower end, it still heats up pretty quickly, and on the higher end it gets pretty warm. I'm not sure who would actually be able to use it unless you're in like really cold temperatures, in which case you probably want to just put the heating or something else on anyway. But that's besides the point. So coming on to the cooling side of things, because that is obviously the main point of this, as it's shown there, Ice Max. The whole point of this is to actually cool you down during summer and replace those sort of cheaper fans that you see on the market. So I tested this working outdoors, and the first day I was using it, I basically set it on manual. So I used the coolest setting. I had the fan low because the fans, to be perfectly honest, aren't really that powerful. Once you get outdoors, the other cheaper fans, their fans actually blow a lot more powerful. You can feel them, as opposed to this where it kind of just gets lost with your movements outdoors. So the fans, they work, and indoors they probably do a half decent job. But when you're outside, initially I didn't even realize that it had back fans blowing down towards the neck because I just couldn't feel them. And that first day, within an hour and a half of me using them outdoors, I should say, the battery died completely. For context, it was quite hot, so the ambient temperature was something like 26-27 degrees, and the way that the app detects heat for this seems to be slightly different. So it seems to be a mixture of both skin temperature and ambient temperature, because it reads a little bit higher, so it probably was reading closer to like 30-32 degrees. But even still, an hour and a half, maximum 2 hours usage, and it was completely dead. So the second day I basically took this along with me. So this is a 20,000 milliamp hour battery. I'm not sure if you'll be able to read that there. Just take my word for it. As you can see, it's quite a big, chunky, heavy battery. And I'd assumed once I connect this up that it'll be fine. I'll be able to go the whole day and it won't have an issue. I believe that day when I was testing, it lasted for 6 hours for 20,000 milliamp hours. Now obviously the 20,000 milliamp hours isn't going to be complete, so you always have a little bit of loss. It's not going to be the full capacity, but even still, even if we say 18,000, that's 3 times the internal battery of this, and it only lasted 6 hours, and then I had to revert back to the built-in batteries. That day my shift went from, I believe it was 11:30 starting, so I would have put it on roughly around 11:30, and I finished roughly around 6:30. So over the 7 hours, it used the entirety of that battery bank, and then it used about 2 bars of internal usage for the actual fan itself. So from that point of view, it was kind of disappointing. The second point to note is throughout both of those days when I was testing it, I never felt cool. So this isn't like when you're sat in a car and you feel all the cool air that cools you down externally, essentially. What this does is the contact points create a cooling sensation, but it's just kind of halfway. So I never felt like I was breaking out into a sweat, but I still felt hot throughout that day. And whether I turned the fans on full or whether I had them further down, probably about medium, 1 or 2. So on the actual settings on here, it gives you like 1, 2 and 3. I don't think I took it above 2. So on 1 it's pretty much nothing. On 2, as it would suggest, it's in the middle. On 3 it didn't really improve it that much, but it did increase the noise quite a bit. And as I mentioned, because I was outdoors, it wasn't really having the same effect as it would if I was indoors. So that's why I chose to keep that on level 2 as opposed to level 3. Now, I did also test this yesterday. Now, yesterday was slightly cooler. So even though the temperature was actually quite high, it was kind of strange. So we had some very cold gusts blowing around. So because of that, it was actually cooling my head, as you can see, bald head. So it was cooling my head a lot more than the fan was actually able to do so. And even still, it wasn't able to actually make me feel cold, if that makes sense. So when you're sat in an AC car, you get this overall sensation where your whole body cools down. This doesn't really do that in that same way. And even the areas where it's making contact with, it's like there's cold spots and then the rest of it is still warm. So the rest of my head was still feeling warm, I would say, not hot. So it did do something. It was able to cool me down to a certain extent, but it wasn't able to make me feel cold at any point, even when the temperature dropped down. So even when it was only 18 degrees, I had this on full blast, and it was only the contact points that actually felt cold. Now that comes on to the second sort of negative that I had about the unit, and that is, for some reason, the first day, I would feel hot spots around here. So I'm not sure whether it's got some sort of internal sort of throttling or some sort of heat protection, but as soon as it's cooled down for a certain period of time, it seems to, even when it's set to just be 16 degrees constant, it still becomes warm. And the problem is, when it's been cold and then it turns warm, it's very, very noticeable. And it's actually quite uncomfortable when it does that, because you're going from a very, very cool point to something that's not cooling your neck anymore, but instead warming up. Now, I had to keep opening up the app to check whether it was still on, whether it was still in the right mode, whether something had changed. So that wasn't very good. The second point is, even though the design is pretty good in terms of contact points, what I've noticed is over the past 3-4 days when I've actually been testing this, it started to create strain on the lower part of my neck that I've never felt before. So it's almost like you have whiplash. That's the kind of effect it gives you, because the weight is basically pressing against your spine around your neck area, where you've probably never had anything like that. Even when you wear headphones, generally the weight is down here, as opposed to being so much on the back of your neck. And because I'm basically quite active in my day job, so I'm moving around, I'm getting up, getting out of the van, that kind of stuff, it means that it's not just sat in one place, it is moving about. Now, to be fair to it, it doesn't bounce about like a lot of my other units that I've tested do. So from that point of view, it's quite good, but it's different. And for now, at least with 1 week's full usage, I would say it's one of those things where it's starting to create aches and pains where you've probably not had them before, because of having the weight distributed in that way. So with all that said, you're probably thinking it's quite negative. On the positive side of things, as I said, it did do something. So it did manage to cool me down on some of the hottest days that we've had. So I believe one of those days was the hottest day of the year so far. And whilst it wasn't perfect, I think it definitely did a much better job than the other cheaper fans that I had, because they just blow the hot air around, whereas this was actually cooling to a certain extent. I did also test it, rather than being in cool mode yesterday, I put it into the AI mode to see whether that made any difference. It didn't really affect the battery life that much, and it didn't affect the cooling that much either. But to be fair, yesterday was slightly cooler, as I said. I still need to do a little bit more testing in terms of whether the AI mode is actually anything different, or whether it's just the cooling mode and not much else. I personally would have thought AI would mean that it would be able to regulate the outside temperature and then determine when it could sort of ease back and save battery life. But the battery life didn't really last any longer compared to the first day when I just had it maxed out on the coolest settings. Now, one thing I do want to point out is I did actually try this on, say, 20 or 22 to see if I could set it like a air conditioning in my car, where I would just set it to 20 and that would be good all year round, or 19. 19 is probably ideal. On 19, it wasn't really doing anything, and similar, obviously, more so on 20. So I did have to crank this all the way down to 16 before I would start to feel the effects. The other thing is, I've noticed that I have to put this on and kind of wear it before I feel the need for it. Otherwise it takes too long for it to actually have an effect. I mean, when you're hot, as soon as you put this on and you turn it on, you feel the coldness instantly. But the thing is, for it to affect you in the way that you want it to, it needs to be working for a longer period. Hence why I'm more so disappointed with battery life, because you know that you need to use it for longer in order for it to work. So for it to die out that quickly, that was kind of disappointing. I'm still in two minds as to whether I'm going to keep this or whether I'm going to send it back, partially because it kind of does do a job, and I'm also curious as to how well it would perform winter time just around the house or internally for cooling down as well. But yeah, as a unit that's probably shown in many pictures, other YouTubers have probably commented on it, how they've taken it outdoors for a jog and things like that, and it's helped keep them cool. Realistically, it doesn't do that. It doesn't cool you down. It keeps you from getting too hot, but it doesn't cool you down to the extent where you actually feel like you've got personal wearable air conditioning, as it may suggest. Anyway, so that is my update for the Ranvoo AICE Lite Plus. If you do have any questions, drop them down in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer them. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any future videos. And I'd really appreciate if you can also give this video a thumbs up. And until the next one, thanks very much for watching.